Alrighty, everybody. So, one of the things that I use to record my videos is XSplit. One thing I didn't really tell anybody is I'm doing a doctorate in psychology, and one of the things that I do is I study video games. And so a lot of the times when I play video games, I record them via this. This is actually a gaming recording software. So if it gets kind of strange, that's why. And this is actually one of those things, because it usually records the video games that I play, which are all right here. So anyways, going back to this video is actually on the content for the Writing Project 1. So you can find the guidelines for Writing Project 1 under Course Content. So you go to Week 1 and Writing Project 1 Guidelines. Now whenever you find this video, there will actually be a video between Writing Project 1 Guidelines and Week 1 discussion questions, so there will be an extra block here. Nonetheless, Writing Project 1 Guidelines are found on the top. So you can go ahead and open those. And here they are. So Writing Project 1, the reflective narrative. Now I'm going to give you a brief synopsis, but I'm also going to post a video strictly, outlining the ideas of a reflective narrative. But nonetheless, it should give you an idea. So let me read through it for you real quick. One thing I want you to notice is that the due dates are not correspondent with the weeks. So if you come down here and we look, August 28th is when the rough draft is due. That's actually next Friday. Most people expect the rough drafts to be due on Sunday because that's the end of the week. But the reason I don't do that is because the final draft, if you notice, is September 6th. It's due September 6th. So that's a Sunday. If you turn it back into me on 30th, and then it takes me 3 days to grade everybody's essays, you don't get it back until the 2nd, and then you have to write a final draft between the 2nd and the 6th. So in order to avoid that and kind of give you an extra couple of days, what I do is I have the rough draft due on the 28th, and that gives me until Sunday night to grade all the papers and send them back. And that way you have a full week to reconstruct your rough draft into a final draft. And it kind of gives you a few days. Now, one word of advice about the rough draft. The rough draft I'm not going to grade stringently at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give, as long as you turn in a rough draft that meets all the minimum requirements, you're going to get 100%. You're going to see red ink all over that. Well, not red ink since it's a digital class, but I'll post everything on there. It'll be in a PDF. And I'll post all the suggestions that I have for your paper, and you'll have a lot of them. But no matter how many suggestions you have, I'm not going to take off points for the rough draft, because that's kind of your learning area. So no matter what, as long as you meet all the minimum requirements for your rough draft, you get 100%. It'll have a ton of suggestions, revisions, editing mark, things like that. Your job is to then take all of those things into account, make changes, and get those implemented into the final draft by September 6th. The final draft is the one where I really grade quite strictly. I have a rubric that I'm going to post online, and you'll be able to look at your grade and kind of look at those areas and see how you're going to get graded. Oops. Now, for this assignment, the actual details, you have 3 to 4 pages of a reflective narrative about an experience you've had with a significant social issue. So now in my introduction video, I had mentioned different types of social issues. One big one, like I mentioned, is police brutality right now. So if you've had an experience with police brutality, that's a social issue. And what I want you to do is tell me an event in your life, explain to me in narrative form, that means in story form. Explain to me in story form, in narrative form, how that event has had an effect on your life. So if you are totally against cops right now, and that's fine, it's totally up to you. You hate police officers, fine. Tell me how your experience with police brutality has molded that experience. Why do you now hate police officers because of this police brutality? Now again, if let's say that you don't like guns, maybe you think all guns should be banned. What experience, what life experience have you had that has made you feel that way? So the reflective narrative basically tells a story, and during the story you're basically giving a moral. With Goldilocks and the Three Bears. She goes into the house and she eats out of the porridge bowls. One's too hot, one's too cold, one's just right, so she eats it. She goes up to the bed to take a nap. One's too hard, one's too soft, one's just right. She sleeps in the bed. The moral of the story, though, after she gets caught by the Three Bears and they're angry with her, blah blah blah. I don't know, some story she gets eaten or something. But the moral of that story is that you shouldn't go into someone's house and you shouldn't be trying on their things, shouldn't be eating their food, shouldn't be sleeping in their bed. Obviously, that's a clear moral, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Well, that's what your reflective narrative should be. It should be a story that gives a moral. So if you're telling a story about how you experience police brutality, then at the end of the day, your moral should be, this is why people should be against the current state of police officers, or the current practice of police officers, or maybe guns. You talk about all the school shootings and the theater shootings, and at the end of the day, the moral of the story is, this is why people should be against guns. So that's what I'm talking about when I say a social issue. Now, a couple of things you have to do inside these 3 to 4 pages. Identify a purpose, audience, and genre. Now, I'm not going to go into those in depth because I want you to watch the video, but I will post a video that does go into depth about those things, and I'll explain them a little bit more in their entirety. But consider your purpose. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to teach the person? Are you trying to inform the person? Are you trying to persuade the person? And it could be a combination. Who is your audience? Whenever we talk about audience, because there's purpose, audience, and genre. Who is your audience? If you're writing a reflective narrative where you're trying to explain why you're against guns and why you want to ban guns, well, you're probably writing to either pro-gun or anti-gun activists. Decide which one, and then you cater the rest of your story to those people. Because, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't be, if you're talking to the people that are pro-guns, and they're against guns, they're anti-guns, and you say, you should be against guns. Well, these people are already against guns, so why do you need to tell them to be against it? Instead, you write your narrative to the pro-gun people saying, this is why we need to ban them. So that's kind of where audience comes in. Now, the genre, same thing with movies. You have horror genre, action genre. What kind of genre is your story, and how can that play into these pro-guns? Now, imagine if you're doing if you're anti-guns and you're writing to pro-gun lobbyists, and you're giving me a story, you may do a horror story, and it talks about, this experience where there was a school shooting, and you write this story, and it's a horror story, and it's all these tragic things. You're writing a story using the horror genre to appeal to these people, this particular audience, and that's kind of what genre is. Part 2, identify a social experience with which you have had an experience. That should be social issue with which you have had an experience, but nonetheless, I've already explained that. Second, develop a thesis around which the narrative and the event will develop. I should mention that a lot of these things aren't going to be done this week. You have 3 weeks to write this. This week we're kind of introducing the class, introducing the project. Next week we'll go into thesis writing, and we'll go into how to organize your essay and things like that. So don't worry too much about your thesis just yet. What you need to start worrying about right now is your purpose, audience, and genre. That's really all that we're talking about this week. And then finally, at the end of these 3 weeks, you'll produce a narrative that describes the importance of the events in your life, and you'll format the narrative using proper MLA guidelines. And of course, I'll give you examples and things like that. So identify a purpose, audience, and genre. I've already talked about all these things, so I'll just kind of leave these here for you to read. But the process work, this is basically how the due dates are laid out. And again, you'll notice that all the due dates don't correspond with Monday to Sunday. August 28th is actually a Friday. September 2nd is a Wednesday. So make sure you're looking at these things and you're being cognizant of the dates so that you're sure that you meet all the deadlines. So just to go through this really quick, the end of this week, that is the 23rd, next Sunday, you should have your homework done from the course content, the week 1 folder, your homework. And that asks you to answer 6 questions, which I went over in the introduction video. So if you need a further explanation, just go back to that introduction video and watch that. The thesis statement, that'll be due next Friday, not the 21st, not this Friday, but next Friday, and that'll be due alongside your rough draft. So in your rough draft, and next Monday, I'll post some videos on how to create a good thesis statement. You'll create your thesis statement, and you'll write your rough draft. You'll have your intro, you'll have your, however many body paragraphs you go with, and you'll have your conclusion. Your rough draft will essentially, thereby, include your thesis statement. So it's not something you like to do separately, although I would suggest it, but you'll turn them in at the same time. That's why they have the same due date. Now, peer reviews, we're going to be doing those the first project we'll be doing them in the discussion boards. So what I'll probably have you do is submit your rough draft to the discussion boards, and then that way everyone can read them and they can give you suggestions. Because one of the things that this class is really heavy on is the writing process. And one of the things that a lot of students and a lot of teachers overlook is the importance of revision. Now, revision isn't necessarily, editing marks and things like that. Revision is changing the organization, improving the quality of your writing, changing sentence structure, adding topics, taking out topics that take away from your thesis, developing your thesis, developing your conclusion. It's those types of things. Revision isn't like add a comma, add a period. That's editing. So there's a difference between editing and revision, which I'll talk a little bit more about next week. But nonetheless, we'll learn about that by September 2nd. And then finally, final draft due September 6th. So that, in a nutshell, is the writing project 1. If you have questions, I'm going to go to the course content, and I'm going to post a place in here for you to ask questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. I'll reply via the text, but then I'll also post a video where I answer the questions outright to kind of, again, give myself presence and hopefully help some people out. So nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the video, and there will be more to come.